In this episode of INSSA Insights, we chat with Jack McKenna, the president and CEO of Prescient, a premier tech-enabled intelligence and risk advisory firm that operates at the intersection of cybersecurity, corporate security, and investigative intelligence. In the following two episodes, Jack and I discuss the shift from traditional physical risks to hybrid attacks involving cyber operations, state-backed disinformation, and data theft, providing essential strategies for NGOs to protect vulnerable beneficiaries and maintain operational integrity in a digital-first environment. I know, like I said, we've worked together in the past. I know you guys, along with X and a lot of these other sort of social media platforms and things like that. How should or do organizations decide, like, yes, we need to figure out what's happening? Are we being threatened? I know in the example I was dealing with, there were just overt threats that led to violence against others. The organization was then named publicly, and so obviously then they knew that there was a threat. But what if they don't even know what they don't know, like that there are threats out there? Should NGOs and international aid organizations be just doing sort of random checking for their name online, or and is it like a reputational thing as well as a cyber and physical security thing?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we might do as an assessment for an organization is interview the key stakeholders and figure out if they've ever received any sort of threats. So that could be, go through all of the phishing emails you've received, or have people reached out to you on LinkedIn and tried to feign romantic interest, or whatever the case is. It's like, what unwanted interactions have you ever had in this organization? And if you find that somebody walked up to you on the street and said, hey, I don't like what you're doing, or somebody sent a letter into the organization and said, I'm going to do something, whatever they're going to do, like, that information is really helpful. So just making sure that you have a good sense of that is important. In a lot of these organizations, they can't afford to have a chief security officer or someone like that. So it may be as simple as, the guy or gal at the front door, had someone come in and said something weird, but they never reported it. So there's no policy. So I would try to get your arms around that first, because that could be your answer. If anyone has come up to you at any time and made a threat towards the organization because of the work that they're doing, you don't need to search the internet. That's something that you want to be cognizant of.
Right.
Never had any of that stuff. I think at a bare minimum, you can set up some X feeds and kind of alerting to references to the organization. It can be done by communications or marketing or whatever. And even if it's not as sophisticated or wide ranging as something that we would do, or some of these paid software companies would do, at least have a sense for what people are saying, because the amount of times, and for most organizations, that somebody on one of these platforms is going to say, I hate this group, or I hate this person, or whatever, we're going to go do something. It actually doesn't happen that often. It's usually more subtle than that. You can kind of start to see a negative tenor kind of forming, and then people talking to each other and all that stuff. You don't need to be that sophisticated to kind of identify that you may have a little bit of an issue here. But best case scenario is you don't have that, and you can maybe check periodically. But yeah, I mean, we do recommend doing some sort of risk assessment, which would involve those interviews, and then maybe like a point in time review of chatter directed at an organization. And there's other companies that do that in addition to us.
Yeah. You talked about using AI, you talked about a few things. Where does cultural nuance, how does that come into play? And you said, you have multilingual people working for you. So much of threats, language, etc., like, it really is sort of nuanced. What sounds innocuous to me might be a totally, big threat to somebody else. I'm on the physical side, so I can, ideally I can see their posture. I can see the threatening face features, things like that. How or what should people be looking for? Obviously, maybe working with their local staff, but in general, how should they be looking for things, or what should they be looking for that might be deemed or should be raised to a higher level? You mentioned the actual threats, like walking in or things like that. But are there, telltale signs or things that are sort of cross-cultural, things like that people can be aware of?
Yeah, I think trying to stay abreast of how people use emojis and GIFs, We've seen that. We've also seen the use of imagery. Like AI is very, very powerful, and given tons of resources, it can be trained to detect some of this stuff. But for most organizations, it's difficult. But as an example, like we have clients who will make a television appearance, and somebody will comment on the YouTube video for that appearance, and it's just a picture of Luigi Mangione in court. Like a well-trained AI model will likely recognize that, but you just download Claude off the shelf, it may not. Like that gets a little bit more nuanced. So I think just getting your arms around the use of emojis, the use of GIFs, the use of imagery, and then just kind of slang terms, like Gen Z slang terms, that can be very helpful, because that's changing all the time. It's a difficult challenge. Don't get me wrong; we struggle with it too. But yeah, it's people know that they're being monitored too.
Yeah.
Like, so the idea of social media monitoring is not new. So if you're a bad guy, when we have somebody who's really going off on one of our clients, and let's say that we get the local law enforcement involved or our security team, and somebody goes to them, very rarely are they like, "How did you find me?"
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh yeah, I had a bad day. Sorry." You know what I mean? Like they kind of know. Like they almost want to be found.
Yeah.
So anyone who's trying to be sly is going to do it in a closed form where they think they're protected, or they're going to use this other means to communicate the threat that's not so explicit.
To something which you and your team were sort of part of at a previous organization, we had sort of a fusion cell working group that was made up of physical security, cybersecurity, and we actually ended up bringing in marketing and communications. I feel like that is the future, this sort of fusion cell where security is security, whether it's in real life, on cyber. Do you think that, like, in my opinion, yes, but as someone on that cyber side of the realm, do you see the future where that line between, cyber and in real life physical security are much more merged together? Right now, they tend to be extremely siloed, and cyber fits under IT, and physical security fits under any number of departments. One, do you think that is going forward? I think so, but I would love your opinion. And then, do you think it should be going that way?
I think it should, but my honest opinion is I don't think it will. I just have seen it enough, and like this topic isn't super new. And so I would even say in the last 3 to 5 years, this topic comes up a lot. I can't tell you how often we talk to a corporate security team, and they go, "Well, we think that our IT team is covering the dark web, but we don't know."
Yeah. And
it's like, I just think that's kind of the nature of large organizations where you've never even met the IT person or whatever. And so I think that a couple things. Number one, you need to have someone at your organization who's responsible for physical security, because when the S hits the F, that's the person who they're going to call. So you have to have someone responsible for it, because I can't tell you how often it's like, "Oh, I think the general counsel or the head of HR or the facilities person," but it's not in anyone's job description. So figure that out, and if you even need a fractional resource, that's fine too. Have someone responsible, and then I would just say, get to the bottom of what data the IT or cybersecurity folks are bringing in, what the marketing comms people are bringing in, and what the channel is where HR would get threats or complaints from internal. Just understand what those things are, and then make your decision on what else you're going to do. Because if you're going to call someone like us or another service provider, and you're going to spend a bunch of money on, I don't know, using whatever we're doing, and then a year later, the powers that be go, "Hey, wait, cyber's doing this, you're doing this. This is duplicative, and we're going to reduce it." You've kind of shot yourself in the foot. So I think that should be more coalesced. I think that the security departments should be cyber and fiscal. I think that they should be more. I don't know that that's realistic. Really large organizations, they don't. But those things that I just described, it's not that difficult. Any organization of any size should be able to get a sense for what those channels are. So at least do that. Identify somebody who's responsible for physical security, and then you're in better shape than a lot of places are.
Well, I know, and I don't know if I'm allowed to mention my coworkers' names who we started this working group with. So if you do watch this, friends, you know who you are. So thank you. And it was a great working relationship. It was very organic the way we started it up, and it was just like you said. Sort of, we kind of realized that we had overlapping, spheres of influence, for lack of a better term, and saw that it was just a necessity because we each had different services and service providers looking at different types of risk profiles, cyber, us with physical, and then marketing was very much reputational risk, which in the NGO context can be a huge reputation is so much. You're building trust with communities who often already see you as potential threat because you're a foreigner. You're dealing with governments who also see you as potential things that you're not, spies, whatever you want to call it. I definitely think I see exactly what you're saying, and I definitely think that there's going to be certainly more. I personally have started to wrap my head around and get learn the terminologies for cybersecurity and things like that. I don't plan on becoming a CISO or anything like that, but just understanding where they come from, I think helps a lot of those teams so that they can talk to each other. Any recommendations or things like that for people to go to sort of get that larger idea for people on the physical side, and then likewise, if you know of any on the physical side, where they can sort of get that basic knowledge so they know what to ask should they come across issues that might threaten them.
Yeah. So number one, I would say we encounter a lot of my comms team is doing the monitoring. That's fine, and that should be included in any of these plans. But the lens where they're looking at it is not the same as the lens that you need it. So at a very minimum, what we tell people is, if your marketing or comms team has a subscription to like a Sprinkler or like some sort of social media monitor or whatever it is, that's fine. Just get one extra seat for someone who has security responsibilities so they can just look and like make a determination for themselves. That marketing and comms people are not trained to flag security incidents and things like that. So like that's insufficient as far as I'm concerned. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have access to whatever you're doing and you kind of work on it together. That makes perfect sense. To your point, I mean, back to the AI thing, if you get yourself the like entry level version of Claude or Grok or OpenAI or whatever it is, you can teach yourself a whole lot about these topics. And so I would start there before you pay for any courses or any of that kind of stuff. But I always encourage people, and I'm guilty of it too, is, my advice is you should never say like, oh, well, I'm not a technical person. That's the cyber. I think that's kind of over. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to be like, building AI systems per se, but, you're not writing software and writing code isn't going to be as common as it is today. It's going to be similar to reading someday, I think, literacy in the future. So you should just stop saying that because there's no reason to not be technical enough. You have the world's most advanced technology ever at your fingertips. So find a way to at least understand the terminology. So even if you don't do the work yourself, whatever, you're just also not buying yourself any credibility within your organization to just say that I'm not technical, because then they're just going to ignore you. Yeah. So I would just strongly recommend you try to get comfortable with the terminology and be confident enough to say, I can figure this out on my own. And the reason why I bring it up too is because I used to say that. Because obviously I don't do the work here at Prescient. I'm running the organization. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't dedicate the time to understand what it is that we're doing so we can have conversations like this.
Yeah. What can organizations do? I mean, you mentioned a few, but what can organizations do, NGOs do, who are really operating in a very complex environment, austere, you name it, maybe even kind of technologically a desert, let's say. What can they proactively do to shore up their sort of online presence, and who, you mentioned something, they should be cooperating with other aspects of the organization, but what can they proactively do when they're operating in environments that aren't necessarily so, let's say modern, they're not using computers all the time, but obviously they still exist in that larger ether.
Yeah, I mean, I really just have to go back to the data ownership thing because that's going to be the biggest risk to the on the digital side. So just understand what you're bringing in, where you're putting it, I think is super important. And yeah, if you're operating in those hard to reach jurisdictions, I mean, you're not going to have access to a computer necessarily, but you can have backups that you can access when you get back to somewhere that does have a connection. That's something that I think is really important. And yeah, it also goes back to what we advise executives. There's really no use in posting where you're going to be or what your birthday is or what, like, I think especially those folks, like, there's just no need to do that. So understand too that your personal activity can affect your work activity and your safety. So whatever it is you're putting out in the world, again, it goes back to data. It's all data. You saying that you're on a work trip in wherever, Sudan, and you're posting pictures on Instagram or updating whatever, like, none of that stuff is helpful. There's really no value to it other than just the personal side. So just be very conscious with what you're posting. And I think these aid organizations and stuff, this is like kind of basic stuff, but understanding how your personal activity can affect your professional activity.
I guess one final question. A lot of our members, a lot of the NGOs writ large, they operate in areas we mentioned before, like that have hostile governments, often reliant on their infrastructure for accessing the web, or are probably infiltrated by the governments, whether it's the local government or the external actors. On that side, what should the physical security team or individuals, security focal points on the ground, what should they be doing? What should they be looking for signs that maybe they are penetrated or maybe they are facing risks, and what can they do to shore up their defenses?
Yeah, in country, I think it's, if you go to airports and they have the signs like nobody at the baggage claim should be, telling you they can give you a ride, like you should just follow their privilege. The same goes for digital. Any unwanted communication of any kind should be treated as suspicious, including people trying to flirt with you on social media or on LinkedIn or whatever. So like any unwanted communication should be, documented, reported, and taken seriously. I also think tabletops are a good idea. So they do that on the cyber side. That's very commonplace these days, but maybe a converged tabletop. So, what happens if, we're on site somewhere and there's a car accident and the phones are destroyed, whatever, like, talk me through what you do. Doing that stuff and not just doing it for IT. I've seen that be very, very helpful. And you got to get creative sometimes, but making sure that the preparation includes the physical and the cyber. I think those are some good things, to start with.
I know that when, at every organization I've ever worked with, probably towards the most recent ones, we always included IT as part of our crisis management team. At the very least, if there's, something happened, they need to lock, just so they'd be made aware that so-and-so's, got arrested or something like that, like, so they can lock down the person's computer and access, to, now that everything's in the cloud for the most part, make sure that they don't have access to that. Is that something that, obviously you just recommended it, but is it something that should be always considered, like, regardless, like, assume that if someone is illegally detained or goes missing or things like that, that they might be compromised or they could be compromised with their phone or their computer or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why these, tabletops or these trip conversations can unearth the vulnerabilities for you to put in place. So as an example, like the, I'm injured thing, somewhere overseas, then it's okay, what do we do? And if the answer is try to find a taxi and like go to a local hospital, like that may not be the best idea. That might trigger like, hey, maybe we have a duty of care gap here where we need to have like an emergency response. Like it's going to unearth those things. Yeah. So I think doing them frequently and making sure it's not just IT focused. So it has to do with the physical security and any sort of disruptions. I think they should all be factored in, including, compromising of the devices. Or we've done one before where, okay, you go back to your hotel room and there's a USB drive in your computer that's not yours and wasn't there when you left. Stop. What do we do? Like that's something that's a little bit different than most organizations. Like, again, like this is why the NGO sector is so at risk and so unique, is because Yeah, you could be traveling overseas and you have some vulnerabilities here, but the risk profile is significantly greater. So I think making sure that you're having a converged approach to the
Yeah.
preparation is important.
One of the things that we started to try and implement at most organizations was, obviously, you mentioned like tying everybody together, like with travel risk management, all these people that also cover different areas. But one of the things that we did was always, depending on where people were going, one was to know where they're going, identify. Sometimes it wasn't the physical security threat; it was the cyber threat. Would you recommend for NGOs operating in, let's say, less than savory environments, that they should go in, if they should have sort of burner phones, burner computers, or at least things that are totally wiped, that have nothing on them, precisely because what you said, like it's easier, especially if they control access to the web, that they could surreptitiously put something on your computer or things like that. And my next question is, do VPNs work, and should you use them?
Yeah, on the VPN side, like absolutely, and you should use Signal and those other communications. It doesn't hurt. Back to my initial point, if an extremely determined, well-resourced nation state wants to get in, they can get by whatever they want to get by, including the U.S. government. That's the case with anywhere. So, yes, this is kind of like low-hanging fruit. It's worth doing, but don't just think, oh, I'm on a VPN, like I can do whatever I want. Like, that's not true either. And as far as like the burner devices and stuff, it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis. I would say if you find yourself doing work-related things on your personal device while you're in a hostile environment, that's not good. Mm-hmm. So either have some sort of burner device, it doesn't matter, or if you need to be connected to your organization, I would say make sure that there's a mobile device management thing in place, so that in the event of a compromise, you could shut off access to the key systems, and compromise of one mobile device doesn't lead to compromise of the wider organization. I think there's just no reason to be pulling up work-related emails or data on your personal device in a foreign country. Like I think that's, again, assuming the threat profile is as great as it is. I think for, most people, if you're traveling overseas, it's not the end of the world, but you're going to have to do a risk assessment based on where you're going.
Are there any particular, governments? This is sensitive, perhaps, so maybe you don't go there. But are there any environments where, let's say, like I said, the physical infrastructure may not be there, but their cyber infrastructure may be far more advanced because of ease of which they access technology nowadays and things like that? That people should be wary of. I can think of large parts of the world where, there may not be roads, but you have a cell phone, and that means you have access to the internet and everything else. Are there specific areas or, regions that people should be extra wary of?
Not necessarily, because I think the surveillance arm of countries that are hostile to the United States, or for organizations that have a similar kind of ethos, the networking equipment is sold around the world.
Yeah.
So I would assume surveillance and work your way back.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that, just because you're in a country that's a little bit hostile, that somebody's watching your every move.
Yeah.
It doesn't. But, I'll give you an example. In the U.S., there's an identifier on everyone's smartphone where if you have location services turned on, it basically is sold back to marketing companies for location data. And that's on people's phones. It's a marketing ID number. For non-law enforcement, when you get that data, you can't see the cell phone number, you can't see the user, you can't see any of that stuff. You just see the marketing ID number. So we use this for our investigation sometimes, but we have to pull a bunch of data and do a bunch of really sophisticated analytics to figure out if the person that we're looking at is our person, and then we're not even sure. So it's very difficult. Those restrictions may not exist in other countries. So the location server, even if you're not on Wi-Fi, if you're connected to the local LTE or 5G network, that's information, that's location stuff. So I think all of that goes in, especially if you're operating in an extremely hostile environment, like you mentioned, Syria, some of those places. You just got to assume that you're basically broadcasting where you are. So, like I said, assume surveillance, work your way back. That doesn't mean you got to live out of a flip phone for every employee of every organization. That's not what it means. But no, I would assume you're not safe really anywhere.
And in instances like that, does a VPN slow things down? Does it help? I mean,
Yeah, it absolutely helps for most people. But again, if you're somebody who has the risk profile that would be on the radar of a local hostile intelligence agency or local law enforcement or whatever, do not assume that that's keeping you safe, because there's lots of ways that you can get around it.
Okay. Any pearls of wisdom for again, a lot of this stuff that INSSA focuses a lot on the physical security side, but we're trying to work with organizations and others to like bring in more cyber people. Are there any words or pearls of wisdom to security focal points who may be out in the far woods of development programs or aid work, and then those at home that they can sort of start putting into place to shore up their cyber security?
I mean, I think the quickest thing is kind of what we mentioned. Form a relationship with the other people in your organization, specifically IT, and figure out what they're seeing and how you can use it in your day-to-day. And the relationship is the biggest word, because there's going to be AI and advanced technology and all that stuff, but if you haven't built a real relationship with a coworker or with a contractor who's responsible for that stuff, they're not going to share anything with you. Yeah. They don't trust you, they don't like you. So find a way to build a relationship with those people so you can do your job well and keep your folks safe. And it's just like you referenced in your fusion center. It's HR, it's comms, it's IT. Just have those internal relationships and don't operate on an island, because it'll make it harder for you.
Yeah. And I would assume the assumption is do that before something happens, so that you're not trying to make the relationship.
Yeah, because when you're up against the wall and you're like, give me access to your thing, they're going to be like, who are you? Like, be proactive.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Jack, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I look forward to chatting with you later on.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you to the Robert McPherson Fellowship for its generous support and donation, helping to make these podcasts possible.